My name's Brian Zimmerman, and I'm product manager here at Enable Technologies, and we're going to be talking about backup and disaster recovery. First of all, why you need to have a good backup solution and a good disaster recovery plan in place. It's not just natural disasters. There's a lot of benefits of doing good planning and a lot of reasons that you need to plan ahead for. So as well as myself, I have Matt Ermstrom joining us, who's StorageCraft's Chief Evangelist.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be here. Hello, everybody.
Great to have you here. Okay, so without further ado, what we're going to talk about is the situation and what can happen with your business and what really are the risks involved in data loss and downtime. What are your chances and what is your risk tolerance to data loss and downtime? What are some of the side benefits of BDR planning? The best practice recommendations as far as IT standardization and backup and disaster recovery from a leading market intelligence agency, and then we're gonna run some hard numbers of what this really means in terms of dollars and cents, which of course is a lot of the time the language that your customers will speak, and then we'll follow up at the end with a demo of the StorageCraft solution and really point out why this is a great solution to meet the needs we discuss in this particular webinar. So to start off, we've all heard the scary statistics that 90% of businesses lose data from disaster recovery or forced to shut down within 2 years. The survival rate for those companies without a disaster recovery plan is less than 10%, which is extremely small. Only 44% of businesses successfully recovered information after a recent data event, and 53% of those claimants never recoup the losses incurred by a disaster. So not only is it very difficult to survive a disaster, even if you survive the disaster, you may never be able to recoup the losses and return that company to their former glory. And of course, this applies to your internal organizations for those who are coming from mid-market enterprise businesses, as well as the MSP market for the customers you're supporting. It's very important that they understand that very few people can survive a major data outage, and from those who do, it's very difficult to climb that ladder back up again.
You know, Brian, it's interesting. I think the first time I gave a presentation that included statistics like this and about the cost of downtime and was probably back in 1998, and have since given hundreds. And these statistics are always one thing that's always remained constant, is that these statistics are always a part of that presentation, and they are very accurate. But what I have found over the years is there's another statistic, and that is that typically about 10% of the people that you're presenting to actually care about these statistics, until what I've also found is there's 100% of the people that actually become one of those statistics really start to care about it. And so we can talk about all these numbers, but I think for the most part what is most important about this is that there are disasters that are going to occur, and the important thing that we need to hopefully take away from this presentation is that the most important thing is that we are aware of that and that we plan and prepare for those things, because as we become one of those statistics, that's when it really matters, and if we wait till then, it'll be too late.
That's a really good point. I mean, we can talk numbers all day, but bottom line is it only takes one event to really ruin a business.
Exactly, yep.
Okay, so next, your customers may be asking, is this going to happen to me? And according to a 2001 study, only 5% of small businesses and 9% of mid-sized businesses reported data loss from a natural disaster. So your customers may use information like this to say, well, the percentage is very low. But a disaster, when it comes to backup and disaster recovery, is not just a natural disaster. It's any event that disrupts your ability to run your business. Right, so this can have effect on your data as well as effect on your productivity, because time is money and productivity is money, and there's a real cost to downtime. Backup and disaster recovery plans will cover incidents like natural disasters, server failures, hardware failures. The mean time for failure for a hard drive these days is under a year, so failures will happen, and you need to make sure you're covered. Employee oversight, human error, accidental deletions, power outages, viruses run rampant throughout the network, and disgruntled employees with too much access. Any of these can be a situation that jeopardize your productivity as well as your data.
We a lot of times refer to these as site disaster versus a machine-specific disaster. It's interesting, the bullet point there about disgruntled employees. We just recently had one of our partners had a customer who one of their IT folks had too much access. Obviously, he created some quick backups of their critical systems and then deleted all their local backups that they had, and then was planning to hold those backups hostage because he was the only one that had the password. He forgot about the backups that were being replicated off-site, and so they were able to go and get those and do the restores that they needed to. But you never know what some of these disgruntled employees might do. And certainly, 90% of the time when we talk about disasters, it's not the hurricane, typhoon, earthquake disaster. It's those local machine-specific disasters that we experience and have to recover from.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and we will talk about this later when we go over the solutions. But one point that you hit on that I want to highlight is that of replication. For a lot of companies, having a backup is one thing, but often it is required to have a backup of your backup or a backup of your backup of your backup. And having an off-site replication really protects you from situations where your backups might be compromised. And if you're required to keep 10 years of financial data or 5 years of information for active legal engagements, or depending on your business, and depending on your customer's business, there might be a requirement to keep that data for a long period of time. Well, then your backups, if that's your archival method, are no longer considered a backup. That's production data. That's necessary. So you need to back those up, and you need to have an off-site strategy and a redundancy strategy for everything that's business critical. So that's one example. In this example, if they didn't have the data replicated off-site, they'd be out of luck.
They would be. Yep.
So what are some of the other benefits that this can bring to an organization? Is it really just about protecting from risk? And what we find is it's not. It's actually also about streamlining your organization and understanding your organization and your needs. Through BDR planning, it requires a business process audit, which often results in streamlining of processes and procedures. You'll answer questions like, where is your data? What services do you depend on? What is the restore priority? How long can you really go without critical and non-critical data and services? And how much does downtime really cost you? We find that people who don't go through this business process audit and BDR planning exercise, they don't really understand the cost of downtime. And sometimes, downtime can just be the collective cost of what your employees make per hour. But more often, it's actually a function of the opportunity cost, right? If you add up all your employees and they make $10,000 an hour, well, that's one thing. But if they actually bring in $50,000 an hour in sales, well, that's the number you're chasing. It's the $50,000 an hour, the opportunity cost that is the real cost of downtime to you. And this isn't even in a situation where you've lost your data. This is a situation where your systems and thus the data is unavailable to you for a period of time. And when you choose a solution and when you make a plan, you need to really understand how much that downtime costs you and how critical those services are, because you need to make sure that you can get them back up within an acceptable period.
Absolutely. It's funny that you bring this up. Just a week ago or so, we're a backup company, right? And we're certainly not immune to outages. And I think what we're finding is that more and more our employees are becoming so dependent on the technology that they don't know how to work without it. And that includes us. I watched as our inside account team, the CRM system went down, and they felt like they couldn't work. There was nothing for them to do if they didn't have some way to access that CRM system. So we have identified that as one of the critical applications in our organization, and make sure that if that system goes down, we have plans in place that will bring that back online within minutes, so that we don't lose some of that opportunity with that inside account team as they sit and wait for that system to come back up. We need for them to be productive, obviously, and supporting our partners, and they feel like they can't do that if that technology is not available to them. And so that's one of our absolutely business critical applications, and we have plans in place to have that thing back online within minutes of it going down.
Great example, and what we're going to show in the demo portion is we'll show how the StorageCraft solution can meet those kind of timelines for your organizations as well. So at this point, I want to talk about some of the IDC recommendations, and IDC is a leading market intelligence firm, about what they say in terms of IT management. One recommendation they make for companies is to extend management technologies that automate the process of asset management, system configuration, software distribution, and reduce the hands-on intervention need for IT staff. Obviously, the majority of you who are already N-able partners understand that. That's one of the key reasons that you're with N-able for your RMM and automation needs. But this is also true of backup. In the case of backup, they found that you can reduce the cost by 85 to 90% by using the newest technologies. Another advice is to constrain your environment to a finite number of standard processors, operating systems, database products, making it easier to maintain and update. It's important. Your technicians have a limited time, and with that limited time comes a limited set of knowledge that they can attain. You can't be experts on everything. Often we try, and often we succeed, but you could only really be a true expert on so many things. So constraining your environments constrains the number of things your technicians have to be experts at. So that's another key point for success. Another piece of advice is to consolidate the servers over a long-term roadmap, reducing the server footprint that must be maintained. And this, of course, virtualization is a key technology for this, but as well as just consolidating on larger systems will help to simplify things. And standardizing IT practices, especially the management of settings and configurations, which is another thing that the N-able RMM tool will help you with this. And then finally, to provide protected storage space within the organization's storage resources and establish rules for the backup of mission-critical data. This ensures adequate capacity for backup and recovery procedures and for restarting of applications. So mission-critical data is really important to establish. You need to know where it is, and you need to know how important that is. And those are the kinds of systems and pieces of data that you're going to want to set up redundancy for. And there's two types of redundancy. There's going to be redundancy for the operational systems. So you can have we'll talk about it later, but you can have a situation where you have a standby system ready to take over in case of a catastrophic failure, or just understand how quickly you can get back up in the event of a failure. The other piece is for mission critical data, you're going to want to have that replicated offsite at least, or a colo or something to that effect. But you're not going to want to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, when it comes to mission critical data.
Yeah, Brian, I just want to maybe share one little experience. That first bullet point about extending management technologies, where it reads about how you can reduce those recovery procedures by 85 to 90%. We have a partner today who, when they weren't a partner of ours, actually experienced a fire in their data center. They were replicating customers' data to their data center. They experienced a fire and pretty much lost every system in that data center was gone by this fire that they experienced. And they had been backing up. They were using kind of an older technology. They were backing up the tape and felt very comfortable in those backups until it came time to perform this recovery. And they basically had to, long story short, had to fly in all their techs from around the country. They worked seven days straight, 24-hour shifts. To get these systems back online, they had to procure new hardware, they had to catalog all their tape, they had to start the restore process, only to find that Gartner was right in their statistic about tape failure, that some of these tapes weren't able to be used. So it took them seven days working 24 hours around the clock. They then learned about StorageCraft and some of the technologies that we used, and at this point, they understand that 7 days could have easily been 2 days, and most of that 2 days would have been in procuring new hardware and have gotten those systems back online. So certainly, new technologies that are available today when it comes to recovery can get you back online much quicker than what we would have experienced in the past. And the only other thing that I would add to this list of recommendations is to make sure that not only do we understand our IT assets, but that we realize that we have human resources as well that are just as critical to this process when it comes to doing recovery, and that as we hire new people in our IT department, that these backup and recovery plans are tested. These new people are trained on those recovery processes, and a lot of times we leave that out as our environments grow. We don't update these these disaster recovery plans, and that's the only other thing that I would probably add to this list as a recommendation.
Really good point. Specifically, there's something you mentioned that I want to highlight is the testing of a plan. And really, an untested plan is no plan at all. If you can't go through and adequately test your disaster recovery plan, then you may not know that you're in a bind until you've got no alternative. Like the example of that company with the tapes, finding out that they couldn't even get access to some of the data after spending days restoring tapes. And here's the real problem. If you've got a system that takes you days to do a disaster recovery, how in the world are you going to set up a regular test schedule for that? No one can afford to take their entire team off for 2 days at a time, let alone the hardware.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a good solution is going to make it easy not only to recover from a disaster, but easy to test that recovery. And we're going to show you some cool ways to do that later on.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me the number of people that we are able to sit down. We do a lot of executive briefings and presentations for large groups, and we always ask the question, how many of you currently have a disaster recovery plan? And for the most part, everybody has a plan. But then we follow that up with, how many of you have tested that plan in the last 6 months or in the last year or in the last 18 months? And very few hands go up, and there's a lot of reasons for that, one of which is that it can be fairly expensive to actually have a plan in place and then test that plan on any kind of a regular schedule. And certainly as we develop our products, we want to make sure that people have the ability to do that and to do it frequently and not have to incur such a huge cost to be able to do that.
Another advantage of doing things through Enable and with the central management that Enable gives you for managed backup and the monitoring and reporting capability is even those, when you say that most of those executives put up their hand saying I have a disaster recovery plan, how many of those do you think may have had a plan set up at one point by some technician but is no longer in operation and they don't really know about it? I mean, testing is one thing to make sure that doesn't happen, but the other aspect is monitoring and reporting on the health and success of your plan. So that's something that having a solution that is part of the Enable product offering will give you that insight, so that those executives are sure that their hand is up.
Yep, and they should be very aware that this is a documented plan. There's nothing like a really good disaster to get everybody. It kind of becomes a chaotic environment, and as people start trying to implement this plan, things could easily go wrong in that type of an atmosphere. To have it documented step by step, here's what needs to happen, here's what needs to happen next. Now when you're in kind of that chaotic environment, you just know step by step by step, and you don't have to stop and think about how to do things. You can just follow that plan and know that it's going to work because you've been through it before and you've practiced it.
Exactly. Okay, so this slide here really kind of hits the points home that we've been alluding to over the last few slides and through the stories and anecdotes that Matt's able to bring to the table, is that it pays to plan. So here's a slide you can use to evangelize the concept among your customer base and really hit home in customer language what it means when you build a proper disaster recovery plan. Not only does a disaster recovery plan help to get you out of a bind in the event of a disaster, but the very act of planning helps to reduce the disasters that you're going to experience or your customers will experience. Because if you find security holes, you're going to plug them. If you find process gaps, you're going to fill them. In the process of planning, you will find anomalies that need to be addressed even before a disaster strikes. And that's going to decrease the chance that you're going to be in a situation where you even need the plan that you just built. So that business process audit is essential. And the statistics we have on this is that businesses that had the best disaster recovery plan on average had 0.9 disasters. In contrast, businesses with an average disaster recovery plan had 3 disasters, and businesses with a poor disaster recovery plan had 3.5 disasters. So that's a huge swing from the best to the middle, and then a small swing again to the poorest in terms of the number of disasters they're even going to experience. So, you've made your money back by planning right there. But here's the real kicker: is the downtime. Right, people with the best disaster recovery plan had an average of 1.2 hours of downtime. I will also tell you that you could even get better than that. as Matt mentioned, that they have a plan where they can get back and up and running in 5 minutes. And in most situations, with Backup Manager StorageCraft, you can get back up and running that quickly. So even 1.2 hours, I think, is probably on the high end of what you can achieve with proper planning and the solutions that we're offering. Now, companies that had an average disaster recovery plan had an average of 14.1 hours of downtime. Then again, the poor disaster recovery plans had an average of 29.4 hours of downtime. Now, that's a huge swing between 1.2 hours and 29.4 hours. Now, what does that mean in real customer language? Well, in the best disaster recovery companies ended up only costing themselves $72,000 a year in expenses and opportunity cost. The average, $1.5 million. The poor, $2.8 million. So, I mean, when you look at numbers like that, the question is not can you afford to plan, the question is can you afford not to. And these numbers easily justify the cost of solutions and the cost of going through and planning, tenfold.
Brian, I don't know all the details of this survey that was taken, but I find it interesting that people who have a really good disaster recovery plan, seemingly, according to the survey, experience fewer disasters. And when I first saw that, I thought, wait a minute, so people who have a poor disaster recovery are more likely to get hit by a hurricane or an earthquake or whatever, but I don't think that's the case. What really the case is that you talked about plugging holes. And I think that if you have a really good disaster recovery plan, as you go through that process of developing that plan and walking through it, you start to find some of those holes that people would consider the potential for disaster. And those who don't have good plans in place, they don't see those holes. And so they end up experiencing more disasters than those that have gone through that whole process, have found where those weaknesses are, and have corrected them.
Yeah, exactly. So we're obviously not talking the natural disaster category, but all the other categories, human error, oversight, disgruntled employees, things like that. Not only are you opening yourself up for more disasters, but you are increasing the impact of those disasters and the cost of getting back up. And that, of course, it costs, right? I mean, we're all in business here. Businesses are there to make money. Time is money. Every hour that your salesmen are on the phone selling is money in your pocket. So every hour that they're not is money taken right out of that same pocket.
Absolutely.
Okay, so at this point I want to go through the solution, the Backup Manager StorageCraft solution, and what we can, what it can do, and how it satisfies some of these needs. So really there are two components that we're going to talk about: Shadow Protect and Image Manager. Shadow Protect is the core of the engine. It's what does the backups. Now we're going to go through these backups and talk about the advantages, disadvantages, and how it works. But we're going to focus more on Restore, because backup's the easy part. Anybody can do backup. And really, in a BDR plan and in a BDR solution, the DR is a heck of a lot more important than the backup. Backing up your data is one thing, but getting it back quick and getting you operational quick, that's really the differentiator. And that's what's going to make the difference between a good solution and a bad solution, a profitable business and a not profitable business. So here I am in the Shadow Protect console, which I just opened up, and I've got a scheduled backup plan that runs every hour. So I'm going to open this up to show you what this is. So here I'm backing up both the C volume and the system reserve volume. So this is an image-based backup solution. The reason we go with an image-based technology in this kind of scenario and for these kind of needs is because of the restorability and the recoverability. Being able to back up whole volumes, and it allows us to use VSS, which is the built-in Microsoft technologies, to ensure that all the data that we're backing up is from VSS-aware applications is contiguous and valid data. It also allows us to do block-level incrementals in a way that file folder solutions can't do. Also allows us to be scalable in a way that file folder solutions can't do. We've done tests with systems of over 10 million files, and this solution can do an incremental backup in minutes. If it's only been 15 minutes to an hour, it's very, very quick. Whereas file folder solutions, just to evaluate what has changed, oh God, they never finish. They take days. So you never really catch up to yourself, and it's not scalable in the same way that this solution is. And part of that is because it's image-based technology. Part of that is just that StorageCraft did a really good job at building their solution. The next thing here is, of course, we just define the destination, which is simple enough. And then we define the schedule. So I'm using an option called continuous incremental. And what continuous incremental means is I never have to take another full. My first backup will be a full, and from then on there is a change monitoring driver as well as the VSS provider that work together to keep track of all the changed blocks on my system, and then my future incrementals, which occur in this case every hour. As you can see, minutes between backup is 60. Every 60 minutes I will take a backup that will request a VSS, a snapshot of only those changed blocks, and add that in the destination. Then the image manager component will, at the end of every day, roll up those intra-daily incrementals into a daily, and the dailies into weeklies, and the weeklies into monthlies, and the monthlies into a rolling consolidated monthly based on my my retention period. And the full, of course, stays untouched because the full is gospel. StorageCraft built the solution from the ground off with one central tenet, which is recoverability. 100% of the time, never corrupt the data. Data is gospel, and so just make sure that things are going to be restorable every time and quickly. And that's what they mean when they talk about the recoverability solution, which you'll see in some of the literature out there. So that's also not touching the full gives you an architectural improvement because you use less system resources, because you don't have to open up these giant multi-terabyte files to merge things into them. No, they keep that separate, and they keep the merged content in that rolling monthly consolidation file. The other thing that this architecture does is it allows you to have granular data when you need it and long-term data when you need it. If I have to restore back to yesterday, chances are I know when. Right? My problem happened 1 o'clock yesterday. Let's go to 1 o'clock yesterday. Well, if I have to restore back to January, I don't think I care if it's January 3rd at 3 p.m. I likely just care that it's January. So in my situation, I can easily keep monthly recovery points for dates far in the past, and then hourly incrementals for dates in the future. And you can keep 2-3 weeks of hourlies and months of dailies, and you can even keep years of monthlies if you want. You can basically define whatever retention you want. But the continuous incremental means you never have to retake that full. Now, what you might be thinking is, isn't the data going to bloat that way? If you never touch the full, what's going to happen? Isn't my data just going to continue to infinitely grow? Well, through a technology they've created called white space pruning, they've solved that problem. And they've got tests in their lab going on for over 5 years that don't show any significant signs of bloat. So the answer is in theory, maybe there's a little bit, but in practice, no, they did a real good job at that. Now, if you don't like the continuous incremental, which, by the way, is extremely important if you're replicating the data, because replicating a full backup over the internet connection, unless you've got one heck of an internet connection, and our experience is most end customers of our average MSP partners do not have near enough internet bandwidth to replicate full backups. So full backups are often being driven over or shipped across to see the first backup. And if you're replicating, being able to do those block level incrementals forever is very key. Okay, so if you don't like this system, you can of course go back to a standard backup, which backs up weekly, monthly, daily, at these times of days. It's a very granular scheduling engine which gives you a lot of options. Okay, there is compression options and encryption options, etc. We won't go into that in too much detail, but that's just something that's important for any enterprise level backup solution, which this certainly is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about restore. So within this console, there is a restore wizard, and I can restore from a node that isn't properly licensed as well. And here, if I want to restore, it's just going to ask me which backups I want to restore from, and it will mount an image that will allow me to search the files and grab the files that I need. But in addition, they actually even make it easier with what's called the image tools, which I would recommend putting on any destination server. And the image tools allow me to simply find a backup and right-click on it and mount it. So in this instance, I'm going to go to backup number 3, and I'm going to right-click and mount it. And here it gives me the option to define some parameters that might make it more successful, but in general, the defaults are good, next, 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 finish, and very shortly I'm going to have a mounted copy of this recovery point, which represents the data taken at that particular point in time. And I can search this just like any other Windows volume. I can browse, I can drag and drop, I can copy to a network share, I can do whatever I want with this data. It's now completely accessible, and that was extremely quick. The other technology that they have, which is a real key differentiator for two things: for testing of your backups and for quick disaster recovery in the instance of a failure. I can right-click on this session and select Virtual Boot. Now, what does Virtual Boot do? Using Oracle VirtualBox, Virtual Boot will actually mount my backups in a running virtual image that I can point my clients to just in minutes to actually be able to use their data properly. Okay, so we'll just go through what it looks like to set this up. You define your drives, you define your system name, the size of memory you're adding to it. Do you want to automatically create the virtual machine? Do you want to automatically start it? All that jazz. And then finish.
At this point, what's happening is it's doing what's called a hardware independent restore. And this is really one of the options that we built into the solution to provide a lot of flexibility when it comes to recovery, is our hardware independent restore. And basically that allows you to take any of these images that Brian has showed you in this chain, whether it's a base image or an incremental image, and use those as recovery points. And you can restore that from a physical machine to a virtual machine, from one hypervisor to another hypervisor. Because we do that hardware-dependent restore, we actually go and look at the drivers necessary to run that image on a very specific piece of hardware or on a virtual machine, and then we inject all the necessary drivers that it will need to boot up. And so as a part of that hardware-dependent restore, we provide that flexibility for you to be able to recover anywhere that you want to. So you don't have to have the exact same hardware sitting on site to do that recovery. In the event that you have a machine go bad, you can bring in, even if you go from an HP machine to a Dell machine, you can bring those in and do that recovery. We'll take care of making sure that all of the necessary drivers are in place at boot up time. And if they're not there, this hardware-independent restore process will inject them into that image prior to the restore to make sure that it will boot up appropriately.
Thanks for running through that. Yeah, that's definitely a key technology that's on the table there. So what I've brought up now is after talking about the virtual boot, is the image manager component. So image manager component really represents a lot of the success of the backup engine, even though it's not the backup software itself. It takes care of all the validation of the backups, the consolidation of the backups, that merge process I talked about, also takes care of the replication. So let's talk a little bit about the replication. The fact that it's integrated replication is nice. The fact that it's this simple is even nicer. And what are your options? You can do local drive replication, replicate to a network drive, and do intelligent FTP, which is something that is included on servers but licensable for workstations. And what we see when we talk to our partners is that in general, partners are not replicating the data from workstations, they're replicating the data for servers. ShadowStream, which is a proprietary technology that StorageCraft has built in order to handle low bandwidth, high latency environments. I mean, obviously, if you don't have the bandwidth to send the data, you don't have the bandwidth to send the data. But if you're on the edge, if you're dealing with drop packets, if you're dealing with high latency, this is an optimized, more robust protocol to handle that. It also is a little bit more plug and play, and it has a built-in encryption. You can secure an IFTP connection, but it requires a little bit more work on your end. ShadowStream is already built into Image Manager, a little bit more easy to use and plug and play. And then StorageCraft Cloud Services is something we're not going to focus on, but I do want to mention. For MSPs that are smaller and maybe don't have their own data center, what they can do is offer StorageCraft Cloud Services to their customers, where they will be able to retrieve files from the cloud, and on certain plans even start up VMs in the cloud, so that a business can keep working even after their entire site has been destroyed. So there are a lot of businesses out there. There are very few businesses actually that really require their on-site manufacturing and things like that. Yes, they need to be done on site, but a lot of businesses out there are service-based, and people can work from home, remote offices, etc. So standing up the servers in the cloud and being able to do that in minutes, not hours, is something that is of extreme value to getting that business up and running and continuing to work even after a disaster. So if you don't have a data center to offer those services to your clients, you can still do it through StorageCraft Cloud Services. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now moving on to Head Start Restore. What Head Start Restore does is it allows you to replicate to either a local drive, network drive, or VMware, either a VMDK, VHD, or volume. VMDK being a virtual disk for the use of VMware, VHD being a virtual disk for the use in Microsoft Hyper-V, and a volume just being a mounted volume. And what you can do here is you can restore the backup, the backups incrementally, so that they're ready to be booted up at any time. So what this does is this helps you with an integral part of your disaster recovery plan for any key system that you need a hot standby available all the time. And each time it does an individual Head Start Restore instance, that's a test of the restore capability, because it's doing a restore. It's doing that hardware independent restore in most cases during that at that moment. Okay. So I think that's the main things I wanted to talk about from a backup perspective. And what we want to talk about next is just go to the floor for any questions or any comments from there. We do encourage you to sign up for a free trial of Backup Manager StorageCraft at n-able.com. We do also suggest visiting our blogs at blogs.n-able.com. You'll find some useful tech tips and white papers, as well as stay up to date with what we're working on in the What We're Working On post, and get some insight into our roadmap. After the webcast, these slides and the webcast will be available on SlideShare at slideshare.net/n-able slides. And it is this session that we're recording, so that'll sound familiar for you. And if you have any questions, you can also reach me personally at bzimmerman@n-able.com. That's bzimmerman@n-able.com. Okay, so at this point, let's see if we have any questions. The first question here is, what features are included in the Enable license? And I think the answer to that is everything that we've mentioned thus far is included in the Enable license. But there are some aspects that are licensable separately than just the backup. The backups are licensed per guest on a virtual environment or per machine in a non-virtual environment. And there's a different cost for desktop versus server, and that's pretty much it. There's some price breaks for virtual and price breaks for SBS, but in general it's just server licenses and desktop licenses. And then all the features of Image Manager, replication, Head Start Restore, IFTP, those are things that are licensable separately. Now an IFTP job is included in the server license, the server backup license. However, a ShadowStream is not. So Head Start Restore and ShadowStream are not included in the price for a server backup license. There's an additional SKU for that. Okay, while we wait for some additional questions, Matt, is there anything else, any key points we wanted to hit home here?
Yeah, let me just talk briefly. When there's 5 founders at StorageCraft. All of them have a history in backup and DR and archiving. And when they went to bring this product to market, they knew that it was going to be a tough ride for them, simply because there are literally hundreds of backup vendors available, and they knew it'd be tough to go and compete. And so for them, it was all about focusing on that, the recovery as opposed to the backup. And they obviously introduced some new technologies, and they wanted to make sure. I mean, the whole reason you mentioned VSS, and the whole reason why we went to the trouble of writing our own VSS provider was because it provides for a much cleaner backup as we do those incrementals, which makes the recovery much more reliable. But there's really 3 things that they focused on. One was recovery. Let me back up. They focused on reliability first, flexibility, and portability. And you kind of hit on all 3 of those things. The reliability comes in the way that we create the backups to make sure that when we recover, using that hardware-dependent restore process, that when you go to boot the system up, it's going to come up. Flexibility in that we can recover anywhere. We can, like I mentioned, go from physical to virtual, and from one hypervisor to another hypervisor. We're completely agnostic when it comes to where you're recovering to. And then portability was making sure that although it is absolutely critical that you have a local repository, that's where you're going to recover, whether it's file and folder or full system, generally you're going to go to that local repository first. But we wanted to make sure that it was easy to replicate those files off-site, and that's why we do our incremental tracking the way that we do, that when you do a continuous incremental job, that those incremental files are kept very small so that you can replicate those off-site. Image Manager there is to verify that those files have come intact and complete before they're actually written to disk. And so those are really the 3 key things that they focused on, and I think that we've done a really good job from a product standpoint in kind of meeting that objective and making sure that we met that criteria.
Awesome. Yeah, and it definitely shows through in the end product. The reliability, the flexibility, the speed, the recoverability, it's definitely all there. So we have a few questions here. The next is NFR software available? Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to offer NFR software, but we do have trial software that's available. So definitely, if you need anything, speak to your sales rep, and we can make that happen. Next question was, some customers are concerned with continuous backups and having only one initial seed, especially in Australia with limited bandwidth. What do you suggest to overcome the concerns? So when you talk about, and I guess the question, if you don't like the idea of having only one initial seed, the answer to that is testing. Typically, when people don't like the idea of having the continuous incrementals, they have this impression that just leaving the data in for longer and longer periods of time with more and more merges is going to somehow give you some kind of big bloated, messy thing, kind of like a database that hasn't been shrank in a while. But that's not really how the image-based backups work. It's not a transactional relationship where you're shoving files into containers. What you're doing is you're looking at the disk image as a whole, as a system of blocks, and you're just writing down the new blocks, pruning out the no longer used blocks. And when you consolidate them together, you're just saying, I'm going to take the blocks from here, the blocks from here, the blocks from here, put them together, kind of like Lego. So the only assembly happens at the restore time or the virtual boot or the mount time, and it happens extremely quickly, despite how long you do this. The length of time, the number of incrementals you have, the span of your data does not affect the restore time at all. It's really just affected by the overall size of your data, and there's really nothing wrong with the continuous incremental. Your end product is the same. You've got those blocks, right? So I think that's the best message. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything else on that one.
Yeah, I would just add, this is a conversation that I've had hundreds of times. There are lots of people who are not comfortable with this notion of creating one full backup and then just doing incrementals. I think it was mentioned earlier that at StorageCraft we've been running a continuous incremental job for going on 5 years now, and continually test to make sure that we're still in a good state. Obviously, there's the potential to have an incremental chain become corrupt, but it's not because of the nature of the incremental. It's because there's the potential always for disk rot that could create issues with that chain. It's one of the reasons why we have Image Manager do scheduled verifications of that chain. We don't just test independent incremental files, but we'll allow the ability to schedule a verification of that entire chain on the schedule to make sure that it's still intact and we can still recover from it. It's also the reason why we, from a philosophical standpoint, won't ever write data to an existing file. So when we create that base image remains intact indefinitely. We will never open that file up and attempt to write changes to that file, because you're just introducing the potential for corruption if you do that. And so there are companies out there that have, reverse incrementals and decrementals, and they're writing data to that base image, and that becomes, we won't do that simply because of the fact that by doing that you're introducing the potential for corruption. And so that's why Image Manager manages that chain, keeps it from growing too long over a long period of time, and at the same time is verifying that chain on a regular basis to make sure that it is intact and you're going to be able to recover from it.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Okay, the next question was, Incentral reports on backups with Shadow Protect, but what about Image Manager reporting? Is there anything in the pipeline? Unfortunately, I'm limited as to what I can talk about when it comes to futures. This is just due to revenue recognition rules since the acquisition. But what I will say is we do have that blog post called the What We're Working On post, and what that will do is give you insight into the next couple of releases that are out there, and you can basically look at what is the development team developing right now. Now that's not gonna tell you what's coming in the release that's in beta right now. Well, because they're no longer working on that. They're working on the couple releases after that, typically, right? So it does give you a little bit of insight into the future. And of course, if you have any other questions, as I mentioned, bzimmerman@n-able.com or sales@n-able.com. Okay, the next question, can we use this product as an MSP with a central repository and management console? So right now it's all on individual systems, and the central management console is Incentral. We have monitoring built into 9.4 in terms of a custom service where the job discovery is built in and it's automatically added for each job that it discovers. So that's built into Incentral 9.4, and we also have reporting via Report Manager based off that custom service that has been built into Incentral 9.4. So that's how we address that. As far as future plans, once again, I can't tell you too much, but if you want a little bit more detail, reach out to me directly and we can chat. The next question is, can you recover if the baseline file is lost or corrupt? And no, the answer is no to that. If the baseline file is lost or corrupt, then you cannot recover, which is why StorageCraft never touches the base file, and also why Image Manager is set to do these scheduled verifications of the entire chain, because if the file becomes corrupt, then you won't be able to restore from it, and you need to know right away so you can start a fresh backup set.
And I would add, it's also why it's so important to, whether you're using image-based backup or tape-based backup, but to have a backup of a backup and be replicating those backups to another storage device, because there's always the potential for, we're writing to disk, and there's always that potential for there to be, over time, experience some disk rot or issues with that storage device. So it's important to have that secondary backup available as well.
Yeah, and I think the fact that disks will fail is a constancy. It's just a matter of when and will data be impacted.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to say Special thanks to our guest, Matt, and to StorageCraft as a whole. The slides here are based on the white paper by StorageCraft that we will send as a thank you for attending. And a special thanks to everybody else who has joined us today. So once again, thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
And I thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Have a great day.